is let me know that the video started. So I'm going to go ahead and get going. What I'm talking about tonight is programming tools. So I'm going to start with a very pragmatic approach to the Mac versus Linux versus Windows. I 100% recommend that you have a Mac, and there's a couple of different reasons for that. One of which, so Linux and Mac are basically the same, and that's the same thing as what your Nintendo Switch is, what your PlayStation is, what the when you get on an airplane and there's the entertainment center in there, that's what that is. Almost every computer system is what's called a Unix system. In fact, if you've watched Jurassic Park, there's a line in it where the girl's going up to the computer while the Raptors are at the door, and she's like, oh, "It's a Unix system. I know this." And so Unix is kind of the gold standard of how 99.9% of all computers on the planet operate, and Windows is the outlier. And Windows is not just a little bit of an outlier, like so much about Windows is completely different, and there's lots of legacy code. So um, programming environments don't work as well on Windows in general, other than the ones that are developed specifically for it, like C Sharp. And the tooling just isn't there. Microsoft has gone a long way in the past couple of years to kind of focus more on the developer community, but really Microsoft is a business to business company and they sell things like Office. They're not really focused on the tech end, like the web servers and the programming environments and that sort of stuff. So it's just a lot easier to be using a Mac. Although anybody who is a gamer will hate the Mac because it doesn't have linear response on the way the mouse moves. So if you're a gamer, just know that you're gonna have to suck it up and swallow it. You're not gonna use it for gaming, whatever. Um, but yeah, so and just more tools come installed by default. Like so, I've got my Mac right here. If I let's see if I can just bring this up here. Yeah. So if I just type in terminal, Mac comes with a terminal that's a pretty darn good terminal. Windows has a terminal that's called console, but it doesn't work very well. You do a lot of your work here in the terminal. Um, and a lot of the stuff that you need is already pre-installed with Mac. So it already has Ruby on there, it already has Python on there, it already has a bunch of stuff just out of the box. If you need to install your developer kit, which you will, so let me make this bigger so you can see this. Um, Mac doesn't come with all the developer tools installed because, not everybody's a developer. But there's a command that called Xcode select that you can run, and it will install the basic developer tools that you're going to need. And when I am, basically, if you're going to put in the time and effort to pursue programming as a career, you should get a Mac. You can use Linux. If you're already using Linux, use Linux. That's fine. That's great. That's wonderful. Linux is Unix too. So, but you want to be on a Unix system. And for the purposes of these tutorials, I'm going to assume that you're actually operating on Linux in the near future. So we're going to get you to a point really quickly where you're able to be logged into a web server where you can have a website and whatnot. So you will mostly be working from Linux, but the difference between Mac and Linux, it's all Unix essentially. So it feels the same. It feels congruent. The things you learn transfer very easily. So that's that debate out of the way. And again, this is just purely from a pragmatic standpoint. I would recommend getting. Let me move this out of the way. So if you type in, there's no verification on this. Mac Education discount. So if you go to the Mac store, the cheapest thing that you can get is the Mac Mini, followed by the MacBook Air, and the Mac Mini will just plug into a regular monitor. So if you go here and take the educational discount, get yourself, excuse me. I don't know if I'd go with the cheapest Mac Mini because it only comes with 256 gigs of storage. And I mean, to put that in perspective, that's like twice as much storage as on your phone. So it's not a lot. And 512 isn't a lot either, but because you tend to install a lot of things and need a lot of development tools and whatnot, they themselves, oh gosh, now I've got my buddy texting me as all his messages are going to come up here. But they themselves, they don't take up that much space, but then they kind of do. over just because of the way things install and whatnot. So I would say you can't go less than 100, or you can't go less than 256. You probably can work with 256. I'd recommend 512, but if you need to save the money, you'll be all right getting the 256. So that's the cheapest way to get a Mac, or you can get one used. But the new ones are so cheap, and they're gonna have a higher resale value. Like what I plan to do with mine is just churn it. Like I'm gonna buy a new one in a couple years, and that's just a cost of the industry. Is, you know, I think of it. I hate to say this, but kind of more like you're renting a computer than you're buying a computer. You want to buy it new, use it for 1 or 2 years, and sell it to somebody for $200 less than what you paid for it, and call that good. Anyway, I spent more time on that than I wanted to, and I don't have a lot of time to go over all of these topics that I put in the description. But so I'll move along. This is the terminal. The terminal is where you type commands. So basically, whether there's an app on a phone or an app in a web browser, every tab you have open. So let me move that out of the way again. So this is an app, and this is an app, and this is an app. They're all different apps. If I go to Twitter, Twitter is an app. Everything is essentially an app, depending on how you want to think about it. But these apps or these programs, they all run pretty much the same, just depends a little bit different on how the visual display is. So the terminal here, the terminal has tabs too. So I can open up new tabs in the terminal, just like I can open up new tabs in my browser. And this is basically, when I open up my browser, I end up at a search page, and I can search for something, and that's kind of, not entirely, but that's kind of what the terminal is. It's the browser searches the whole internet. The terminal kind of searches your computer. So if I just start typing, the terminal is searching for a command that matches that name. So if I just type in, there's a command called echo. If I just type in EC, you can see that right now it's red. That's my color scheme. That's because the command's not found. If I hit tab a couple of times, it's going to give me auto suggestions. So this is very similar to, if I go in the browser and I start typing pizza, it's giving me an auto suggestion. So there's a lot of similarities between the thing that you're already using most in terms of like functionality. And it also, you might have seen, let's see here. You'll see this is auto completing. So these are commands that I recently ran. Anyway, so I'm going to type a command. The command is echo, and echo is like, you say something out loud, it bounces back, you hear it. Echo, the purpose of the command is whatever you give it, it just gives it right back. So this is kind of like console.log that we did yesterday in the browser. So I'm going to do echo, hello, world. Whoops. There we go. And then you can see what happened was the command echo runs. It receives the arguments. We talked about arguments yesterday, just briefly. We'll talk about that a lot more later as we get into functions and whatnot. And it comes back and it prints out what the string is. So it's very simple, very dumb. But this is something you're going to be spending a lot of time in. And the one that I recommend getting, I use iTerm, and that's what I recommend that you use. There's a site where actually pretty much I was going to bring this up. So webinstall.dev has pretty much all the tools that you need as a developer. I actually created this site with this course in mind. So this is really, truly the best way to install the most common tools. So you're going to need to install a tool called Node. This is for programming with JavaScript. You've, of course, heard of JavaScript. As part of what I'm going to be teaching, you're going to need to have Go. And this is a very practical, very modern language, very easy to learn. One of the things that it's praised for most highly is that it's the kind of language that you can learn and be productive in a weekend. Now, that's if you already know some other language and you have some of that background. It takes a little bit more than a weekend if you've never programmed in any language at all. I also, sometimes Python, I recommend learning Python when I'm not the one that's teaching. Because I am going to be taking you through on this journey if you're going to follow along with me. But you will need Python for certain things sometimes, so it's good to have. And the best way to install it is PyEnv. So if you click these links here, let me show you how easy this is to install. So I'll just go ahead and let me finish with this list first. There's a bunch of tools here. Um, if I recommend, if at all possible, if you need to install something, somebody tells you to install something, check here first before whatever method they recommend. The reason being, I designed these instructions and these installers so that they won't mess up your computer. Because if you just search how do I install Python, you're going to end up at a tutorial that basically messes up your system settings and messes up your system version of Python. And now some of your system tools won't work because your Python is messed up, etc. So you have this kind of problem. But I'm just going to go ahead and click here, and there's copy and paste terminal commands for how to install stuff. So I'll show you how to install, well, I'm not going to do Flutter because that one is really big and it takes a long time. Flutter, if you're going to do mobile development, that's kind of the best thing to be learning right now for mobile. But in either case, you're going to have to learn some of these other things. So here, we just have a copy and paste a command with some arguments, and you copy and paste it into your terminal. And it's really important when you do stuff in the terminal, this trip people up all the time, read what it says. A lot of times you're tempted not to read because you're like, whoa, a bunch of stuff just flashed on the screen really, really fast. I don't know what to do. But the truth of the matter is, you need to exercise your reading skills because when there's a problem, it may not be necessarily the last line, but when there's a problem, the problem will usually be identifiable from the text. And so you kind of have to learn how to scan through and see, okay, like for example, this here is a file path, this with slashes. So /users/aj/downloads. So this is a file path to my downloads folder, right? And you'll see, a lot of times error messages will have the same prefix. So it looks like it's the same line 50 times, but it will actually be different, and the differences are typically at the end. So I just want to put that up front. You're going to have problems, and your reading skills are going to be able to help you solve them. And you're going to be able to learn the context of what questions to ask and what words you need to be familiar with from looking at messages that are output. In any case, when you do this for you, you will get some additional instructions that basically tell you to copy and paste a command to finish the install. Because I'd already installed this once before, I don't have to do that. Let's see. Yeah, we've got a couple of comments here. Okay. And feel free to ask questions. So I'm going to be wrapping up in just a second, but feel free to drop questions because tomorrow I'll be doing this again. I'm going to be doing this every evening. I might skip on the weekends a little bit, but I'm going to try to be doing this every weekend, and we're going to step through a mix of beginner material starting from scratch, and then a mix of just questions that are coming in from people that already know stuff, so that we can keep it fresh. And I recommend that you watch both, because a lot of the issue with vocabulary is you just have to hear it over and over again, and it's okay that it doesn't make sense at first. So that said, okay, we talked a little bit about the terminal, Mac and Linux, and we talked a little bit about the programming frameworks. You will have to use Node. There's not a way that as a developer you will not use Node, and I think that Python is not quite as a guarantee, but it is. There are a lot of tools that even if you're not programming in Python, the tools that you will need to use will be written in Python. And again, this is absolutely the best way to install it. It's not going to mess up your system settings, and all of these things come with cheat sheets. So, and again, some of the stuff you're not going to understand right now, that's fine. Some of it's going to be a little bit beyond you, but just take a look here and know that I have carefully curated these instructions for these tools with the things that I feel are the most relevant. You can hit me up on Facebook, or you'll learn about GitHub pretty soon. There's actually a link to the project's GitHub where you can open up an issue. So if you have a question about something specific, you can go into the installers link. So you click on GitHub there, you click on the installers link, you can click issues, and you can click new issue, and you can ask a question. So you would actually say open blank issue. Actually, I have discussions open now too. So that's a new feature. They just added this last month. So feel free to reach out to me any of those ways, especially, if it's about this stuff. You can go to GitHub. You'll want to have a GitHub account as a developer. But we'll talk more about that later. Tomorrow, I think what we're going to talk about is a computer programming concept. I think I'm going to be talking about recursion, which sounds like unfamiliar, but it's actually totally something that you do all the time, just as part of normal life. But in just like with arguments, it's a math term, and so we use the math term in programming, but it just means an option or a specification that you give. Same thing. Recursion is a very simple process. Anyway, I'll go into it. I'll go into it tomorrow, but I just wanted to let you know about why it's. Whoops, that's not what I meant to go to. There we go. Some of the reasons that I think that you should have a Mac. I wanted to just show you what the terminal is. And by the way that you do the search on the Mac, I mean, if you're not familiar, you just click this button or you do a command space and that opens it up. And the terminal is going to be your friend, and webinstall.dev is going to be your friend. If you're already a developer, take a look down the list. You're bound to see some stuff you're familiar with, and I guarantee you this is a better way to install it than Brew or than especially some random blog you find. And Brew is actually on here too, and it'll fix some of the install problems that Brew normally has because I do a slightly different install of that. Anyway, I'm a little bit over time as per usual, so I'm going to go ahead and sign off. But I hope to I won't see you because, the camera and all that. But I hope to have an interaction tomorrow and throughout this next week. You guys have the best weekend ever. Or it's only Thursday. The best Thursday night ever. All right? Adios.